Few things capture the human imagination more than the idea of spies and intrigue and mystery, right? Well, I dug a little bit further back into history and found the one remarkable little redhead that did exactly that. So stay tuned for today's episode about a little unknown lady by the name of Elizabeth Knollys, who served Queen Elizabeth I. On June 15th of 1549, a little girl entered the world where a wrong sentence could cost a man his fortune, his freedom, or occasionally his neck, and where the safest hobby a person could possibly cultivate was minding their own business. And unfortunately, for nearly everyone in Tudor England, nobody had yet discovered the sport of minding their own business. England in the 16th century was a nation fueled by ambition, suspicion, and enough gossip to power 3 modern cable news networks, and possibly a barbershop. Into this elegant madhouse came Elizabeth Knollys, born into a family so tangled up with the Tudors that historians still look at the family tree the way that a farmer looks at a snake in the hen house, carefully, maybe nervously, and with a stick nearby. Now, before we go any further, we should discuss the Tudor court itself, just in case you might not be familiar, because modern people often imagine it as one long parade of glittering gowns and lute music and attractive people staring moodily out of windows. This is the way it's portrayed on TV, after all. TV, movies, whatever. This is only partially true. The Tudor court was also a pressure cooker full of rivalries and religious disputes, secret alliances, marriage negotiations, political schemes, and enough paranoia to make a raccoon lock its own trash can. Everybody smiled, everybody bowed, and everybody lied. It was civilization with embroidery stitched on top, made to look pretty. Elizabeth Knollys was born into precisely that sort of family that caused the headaches for kings and bishops and diplomats and genealogists alike. Her mother was Carey, daughter of Mary Boleyn. If the Boleyn name sounds familiar, it's because she was the sister of Anne Boleyn, which means Elizabeth grew up close enough to the royal bloodline that rumors started following her family around like stray dogs after a butcher's wagon. One rumor in particular absolutely refused to die. There were whispers that Carey herself may have been the daughter of King Henry VIII. If you look at some of the photos of her, there are some striking similarities between this Elizabeth and that Elizabeth. But no proof ever emerged, mind you. Historians have searched for evidence the way that prospectors search for gold, and with about the same amount of back pain. Still, the rumor lingered, and it still does. And you may understand something about Henry VIII. The man married 6 wives, executed 2 of them, changed the religious sculpture of England, dissolved monasteries, fought political enemies, and consumed enough meat to alarm modern cardiologists from 4 centuries away. He was not the kind of fellow whose name drifted casually in and out of conversation. If people suspected you had royal blood, whether true or false, your entire life changed shape around it. Now, if this rumor about Carey had been true, then Elizabeth Knollys herself would have been the granddaughter of Henry VIII, which would make her not merely a courtier, but a walking political thunderstorm in silk sleeves. But yet the remarkable thing is this: her family never pushed the claim publicly. They never tried to leverage it into a succession argument. They never waved it around like the tavern drunk with a sword. They kept moving through court life quietly and carefully and intelligently, which in Tudor England was considerably more rare than bravery. The Knollys family were Protestants, and serious ones too. During the reign of Queen Mary I, when England swung back toward Catholicism, the family fled abroad. There was so much turmoil in the religious world that there were, you should check out and look up priest hides at some point. Go down that rabbit hole. It's fascinating. Anyway, them fleeing England completely because of their religion, that alone tells you how dangerous the times were for these people. People today complain when social media becomes hostile. In Tudor England, disagreements about religion could lead to imprisonment, confiscation of property, and sometimes even execution. There was no such thing as an awkward Thanksgiving dinner debate. There was only survival. When Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne in 1558, the Knollys family returned to England and promptly rose back into royal favor. Francis Knollys, Elizabeth's father, became one of the Queen's trusted advisors. Suddenly, the family stood so close to the center of power again, and young Elizabeth Knollys entered the royal court as a maid of honor. Now, that title sounds decorative. Modern ears hear maid of honor, and we imagine flowers and weddings and a woman trying not to cry during a speech about friendship. But a Tudor maid of honor, well, this is somebody who served the Queen personally. She dressed near the Queen. She walked near the Queen. She heard conversations near the Queen. And in court, where information was more valuable than gold, proximity itself became power. By the time Elizabeth Knollys became a gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber in 1566, and no, I do not mean the chamber pot, the Privy Chamber, private chamber, in 1566, she had entered the Queen's most favorite and most intimate circle. This was not just some office position. This was access. The Privy Chamber was where Elizabeth relaxed, dressed, argued, laughed, sulked, strategized, and occasionally frightened ambitious men into absolute emotional collapse. Imagine the things that Miss Elizabeth Knollys must have witnessed. She lived through the Spanish Armada. She lived through the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. She lived through assassination plots and marriage negotiations and succession fears, religious tensions, and definitely enough political scheming to make 3 modern governments resign in embarrassment. She saw it all, and all the while, she remained there, quiet, trusted, steady. That alone is astonishing. Most Tudor courtiers served about as gracefully as a goose in a thunderstorm. One wrong alliance, one foolish marriage, or one overheard insult, and down they went, or at least their heads. Yet Elizabeth Knollys managed to stay close to Queen Elizabeth for decades. You know what that reminds me of? A man trying to carry a bowl of soup across a frozen river during a windstorm while wolves debate his future from the shoreline. One bad step, and it's all over. Now, one of the most entertaining things about Tudor England is how everybody believed they were subtle while behaving with the delicacy of runaway livestock. Take Elizabeth's sister, Lettice Knollys. Lettice, not U-C-E. So not quite the food, but still very similar. Lettice secretly married a man by the name of Robert Dudley. And if that name sounds familiar, well, you might just know your Tudor history. Robert Dudley was the Queen's longtime favorite. And when I say the Queen was upset by this, I mean she reacted with the calm restraint of an hornet's nest that was hit by a shovel. Elizabeth I took that marriage personally. Dudley had occupied a unique place in her emotional life for years, and Lettice's decision detonated at court like cannon fire at a church picnic. This was not good. Yet somehow, Elizabeth Knollys survived even that family scandal. And that tells you something important. She understood court politics not as a game, but more like as weather. Dangerous weather. The kind you watched carefully. The kind you respected. The kind you never challenged unless you wished your descendants to become cautionary tales. And now we arrive at the truly remarkable part. Elizabeth Knollys was not just observing this history going on around her. No, this little crafty redhead was quietly participating in it. In 1593, her father wrote a letter explaining that he had learned through, quote, my daughter Layington, end quote, that Queen Elizabeth had formed a negative opinion about his particular conduct. I have to think about that and what that means for a moment. Elizabeth Knollys possessed enough influence, enough trust, and enough access to quietly warn one of the Queen's most powerful advisors about royal displeasure before it became public disaster. That was insider information in the purest sense. Today, a man buys suspicious stocks before a company announcement and the government investigates him. In Tudor England, a warning from the Queen's inner chamber might save your position, your fortune, or your entire political career, or even your life. If there had been a Tudor stock market, Elizabeth Knollys could probably have retired by the age of 30 with 3 castles and a decorative swan pond. There's something strangely admirable about her specific restraint. She never became infamous. She never tried openly to dominate any kind of politics around her. She never pushed herself into scandal. She served, she observed, she advised quietly, and she survived. And survival at the Tudor court was no small accomplishment. Remember, this was the same era that produced Thomas Cromwell, Anne Boleyn, Mary Queen of Scots, Robert Devereux. He was the Earl of Essex. This was a period where blatant people rose quickly and fell much faster than they rose. One decade you were dining with royalty, and the next decade you were discussing philosophy with the executioner. History happens that way. Maybe it's quiet at first, and then all at once. Elizabeth married Sir Thomas Layton in 1578 at the Chapel Royal itself, one of only a few weddings there during Queen Elizabeth's reign. And that tells you how trusted this woman remained. The Queen approved of the match and even gave them gifts. Now, Thomas Layton served as governor of Jersey and Guernsey, which sounds glamorous until you remember that governing remote islands during an age of naval threats and political tension and limited communication was about as relaxing as herding cats through a fireworks factory. I have 5 cats. Herding cats is difficult enough. Elizabeth helped manage estates and correspondence and practical affairs while continuing her court service. She balanced noble family life, political obligations, royal expectations, and household administration, which is enough work to exhaust 3 modern executives and a tax accountant. She had a lot on her plate, and still, she kept her reputation intact, much better than her sister did. That is perhaps the most shocking thing of all. There was no grand scandal. There was no spectacular betrayal, no dramatic downfall for this woman. History often remembers loud people because they explode dramatically. But kingdoms are usually held together by the quieter people who are standing just outside the spotlight, keeping disasters from multiplying. Elizabeth Knollys belonged to the second category. Now, there's another detail worth considering. She likely knew secrets that never reached history books at all. Imagine that. The Tudor court ran on whispers, details arranged behind curtains, marriage negotiations discussed privately, political fears shared in confidence, ambassadors flattering one faction while secretly reporting on another, nobles maneuvering for influence, courtiers pretending friendship while calculating advantage for themselves. And Elizabeth Knollys stood close enough to hear much, if not most, of it. If walls could talk, Tudor walls would probably request legal counsel first. Modern people love the romance of the Elizabethan era, the gowns, the portraits, the poetry, the pageantry. But beneath it all was a deeply anxious kingdom, worried constantly about succession and invasion and rebellion and religion and loyalty and morality. Queen Elizabeth herself walked through life carrying the burden of ruling a divided kingdom because of what her father had done, while remaining unmarried in a world that was completely obsessed with heirs. And beside her, for decades, stood one Elizabeth Knollys. Elizabeth was not shouting, she was not scheming, she was not demanding fame. She was just watching and listening and surviving and serving. Now, eventually, Elizabeth Knollys disappeared from the record before June of 1605. Like many historical women who were not queens themselves, the details of her death fade into kind of a frustrating silence. And historians know that she died before certain financial records changed hands, but the exact circumstances remain uncertain. And there's something strangely fitting about this. She was a woman who spent her entire life among secret that she just held, and she held them quietly. But her descendants continued on. Her family connections spread through English nobility. Her bloodline moved into future generations. She had several children, but one of her children, who ended up dying in childbirth, had 13 children in 14 years. Holy crap, that poor woman. And somewhere in the dusty archives, the forgotten letters, the household records, the faded accounts, traces of her life still remain, waiting for curious minds to stumble upon them. Which brings us to the true lesson here. History is not only shaped by kings or generals or famous rebels. Sometimes it's shaped by people standing quietly near power, who are hearing everything, understanding more than they reveal, and surviving the storms that destroyed the louder souls. Elizabeth Knollys may never dominate popular history books the way Henry, Elizabeth's father, did, or Elizabeth I herself, or Mary, Queen of Scots. But she witnessed one of the most explosive periods in English history, from the best seat in the kingdom, short of the throne itself. And I can't say the throne would be much better than her vantage point. And somehow, this woman managed to avoid becoming a Tudor tragedy. In Tudor England, that may have been the rarest talent of all, and bravo to her for doing it. So here's my question for you. If you could spend one single evening hidden inside the private chambers of any royal court in history, hearing every conversation honestly and uncensored, which court would you choose? And how do you think the truth would actually impress you or horrify you? I like this one. I think this is a really fun question. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you follow the History Happens Facebook page for more deep dives into history's most fascinating moments, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Every subscriber helps. And I keep on checking out my hat in the mirror here. I made this. Check that out. Made it myself. Anyway, thanks for watching.